Hello, I welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to you from any part of the world you are watching us from. So we are here live today to continue our section on our Azure Study Live series. Today mark the last day of the event that started in May. Our social media handle are on the screen there. So for you to stay up to date with our current event and what is happening within the community, Microsoft Azure Nigeria community, I will encourage you to follow us on our handle there on the screen. So we will be rounding up today on the topic that says Azure storage, and that will be taken by our wonderful speaker, Promise Wachuku. And another section will be coming up after this one. That will be between 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Nigerian time, West African time to be precise. But then, and that will be taken up on the Azure DevOps fundamentals. So I will be bringing up the speaker for today's event in the presence of Promise Wachuku. Promise, you are welcome. And how do you see the section, and how do you hope that the progress will be for today's section, being the last day of the study series?
Well, all I can say is it promises to be interesting. Basically, we just want to cover the foundation for Azure storage. I hope I would be able to explain to everyone to the best I can. And I'm hoping that everyone will be able to get the basic knowledge needed. So once you have that knowledge, you can always build on that knowledge and understand how the Azure infrastructure works. So that's the plan.
That's good. That's great. Okay. Yeah. Over to you, Mr. Promise. All the best.
All right. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. You're welcome to the session for today. As you can see, I'll be focusing on the topic Azure storage. This happens to be a very, very interesting topic. The reason is that there is virtually no appliance or infrastructure you want to deploy on Azure where you wouldn't need some form of storage, right? So understanding the basic concepts about Azure storage gives you a head start. So for those of you who are planning on, taking your certification on the Azure Administrator, you definitely want to understand some things on Azure storage. Anyway, I will just give a brief intro of myself for those of you who don't really know who I am. My name is Promise Uche Onwachku. I am a subject matter expert at TechExpert, and I have over 9 years experience in cloud deployment and administration. I as well do, lots of Microsoft trainings, not just on administrator series, but on other series as well. And hopefully we will be seeing the best of the training sessions as time goes on. All right, I'll be moving forward on what we'll be focusing on for this training session. So basically, I want to delve right into, let me call it a brief definition on what the storage account is all about, the blob storage, how you can secure your storage account. I also talk about the Azure files and file sync, and then how you can manage your storage. Join me as I take you through some of these topics. So you will be asking yourself, what is Azure storage all about? Well, this is basically a service just like you have the other services on Azure. And this time around, what this service is all about is that it helps you, store your files, messages, tables, and other kind of information you may want to store in Azure. I think what makes Azure storage unique is the fact that, you don't need to bother about the infrastructure behind all of this. All you just need to do is just sit back, relax, and enjoy the infrastructure provided for you, right? You can see it has some features such as it being durable, it's being secure, you can scale, even how you want to manage it. You can actually put some effort into, okay, you can decide how you want to manage let's say the files or the things you would like to store in the storage accounts, right? And well, it is actually very, very accessible, right? You may also be wondering, what other things could you use the storage accounts for? Well, you can actually use it for storing, let me say, just like you have your virtual machines, all those information on your virtual machines is actually resting on an infrastructure on Azure that's helping you store your OS, your data, and all of that. You can as well store structured and unstructured data on it. For Azure storage, I would say there are basically two tiers, which is the premium and the standard tier. We'll be delving right into that as we progress in the lecture, and hopefully I'll show you what the live environment is like. All right, the next thing we'll be looking into is Azure containers. So let me bring out my what's it called, my pointer, so you should be able to see where I'm focusing on. So basically, Azure containers, you're wondering, what is Azure containers all about? What's the idea behind Azure containers? Well, Azure container is like, I would call it a folder, or look at it as a drum inside of the storage account, right? So you open a storage account, right? The next thing you want to do is to create a container where you will be able to store these resources. And you can see here a basic definition is just saying it's a massively scalable object, right? That can help you store your text, or you also have concepts such as Azure Tables. Now, Azure Tables is basically ideal for someone who is probably running something like, let me say, a database infrastructure. You want to keep your tables somewhere, right? So you can actually make use of Azure Tables in doing that. So you can see here, it says it's ideal for storing structured and non-relational data. Another thing you would want to consider, or another feature that Azure Storage provides you with, is what we call the Azure Queues. And Azure Queues is nothing more than, like a messaging store, where let's say you're deploying some applications now, and maybe those applications you need to be able to send messages on those applications. You can use the Azure Queue as a message store for your reliable messaging between application components, right? So that is one great feature you can make use of when deploying an application. Right, the next thing we want to actually consider now is Azure Files. Well, this particular service in question it's actually a very, very nice service. It's a nice service because a lot of us, we do something on our infrastructure, on our on-prem infrastructures, where we have to create a special server that takes care of our Azure files, or let's say that takes care of our files in the on-premise environment. This time around, Azure is trying to make things simpler for us. Instead of you going to buy or deploy those servers, why not make use of Azure files in actually sharing files within your organization? So you could actually create these files, or create the Azure files in Azure, store your files in there, both the files you want to be shared and the ones you don't want to be shared. You could actually deploy that service on Azure, and then you have what we call like a command you can use to, mount this file share on your devices on-prem. And then everyone in your organization is able to make use of, the files which you intend to share across the organization. So this is actually a wonderful tool that has not been I would say has not been explored as should be. And the whole essence of this training, and why we are bringing this training to you, as a community, is we want to be able to ensure that these services. So let's say, for instance, a lot of people have been hearing about what Azure is all about, but because they don't have an idea of what services Azure provide them, they are not able to maximally, or they're not able to make use of Azure in the maximum way they can. Right. So one of the things we hope to accomplish with these trainings is that we hope to let you know some of these fundamental features that you can make use of in Azure that will actually make work easier for you both in your on-prem environment. And talking about Azure Files is one of those features that is actually very desirable and it's actually nice to make use of. We will be progressing on this training as we dive right into the next slide. Now, you may be wondering, we have the various kind of storage account types, right? And you may be wondering, what is the difference between these account types? What makes this different from the other one? What makes this unique? Now, this is where we kind of draw the line between each of these account types, so you understand what makes each of them different and what they support. So what kind of services do they support? What kind of tiers, are they able to take? And what replication options are available for each of these storage account type? The first one we'll be delving right onto is what we call the blob storage. This is actually a very common one because I don't know how many people remember what it was like, what Azure Portal was like the very, very first time, Azure came on. I'm talking about, let's say, what Azure Portal was like in 2018, let me say in 2017, 2018, right? There have been lots of changes from then up until this particular moment. And one of the things that made it unique was the fact that as at that time, what we really had very common was the blob storage kind. So let's say you were deploying virtual machines, right? Virtual machines at that time was making use of mainly blob storage. Blob storage comes in the form of, like, I'll say, VHD files, right? So with those VHD files, you are able to store them in the blob storage. But now the evolvement of Azure, or how Azure has been evolving, has brought about various storage account types, such as the storage general purpose V1, the storage V2, that's the general purpose V2, and the blob storage. And then we also have the file storage. Now, what makes each and every one of these unique is the fact that you have different services they support. So what I mean by this is this: if you take a look at under the services supported by the blob storage, you will see that the blob supports what we call the block blobs and the append blobs only. Whereas when Azure began to evolve and they began to look into various storage account types, there came in another storage account type like the general purpose V1 that could actually support both blobs, files, queues, tables, and disk. And now you could see that initially the blob storage could support just the standard tier. But then when came the general purpose V1, we saw an improvement that could support both the standard tier and the premium tier. Now, also look at the replication options. Now, for some of us who are wondering, okay, what is this replication option all about? Well, one thing you want to understand about the replication option is the fact that Azure wants to provide some kind of high availability to your service. When I'm saying high availability, I mean, let's say, for instance, something happens to one of the regions where your service is being hosted. Azure wants to ensure that if that happens, your service doesn't go down. Within Azure, it doesn't go down, right? So in this case, Azure is able to bring what I call replication options, in the sense that it replicates your data across regions and within regions. So first of all, it replicates your data across data centers in a region. And when I'm talking across data centers, I'm referring to the first one called the locally redundant storage. The very unique thing about this is that the locally redundant storage just basically has to deal with one region, just one region. But the particular thing about a region is the fact that you could have as many data centers in one region. But for this particular locally redundant storage, what it does, or what Azure does at the back end, is that it takes 3 copies of your data and replicates them in 3 data centers within that region. Right? So you have a scenario where, let's say, if most of you know a city called in Lagos, let's say a state called Lagos in Nigeria, and then another state called Kaduna in Nigeria. Now, let's say the region itself is called Nigeria, but you have various data centers, and those data centers could be referred to or seen as states within Nigeria. And let's say we pick 3 different states in Nigeria with very unique positions. So I'm picking a state like the Lagos state. I'm picking one in the east, such as Imo State, and then I'm picking one in the north, such as Kaduna State. Now what Azure is hoping to do, or what Azure does, is that it takes each component of your data and replicates them in each of these states. The idea is that you are able to experience high availability. So for instance, let's say something happens in the Kaduna region, or let's say something happens in Kaduna State, where we have a data center hosted in. The region in Imo State, or the data center in Imo State and Lagos, are able to provide some form of availability for you, so your data doesn't suddenly just go off. Now, there's a big difference between when I say Azure is providing a form of replication for you and people looking at it as a form of backup. So this is not the same thing as a form of backup. It is just a form of replication that Azure does to ensure your data is always available when needed in Azure. If you would want to have some form of high availability, like some form of high availability and backup, you would obviously need to go for some other services within Azure to provide you with some backup services, such as maybe applying some kind of let me say snapshots to your data and storing them in like a key vault or something like that. Those are other options that can be explored when you want to provide some form of high availability and backup. All right, now let me explain the concept of the GRS. The GRS basically talks about the geo-redundant storage. Yeah, what it does is that it provides 6 copies within 2 regions. So whenever we are talking of the word geo, we are referring to more than one region. So in this case, Azure wants to ensure that you have, let's say, 2 regions where you have 3 copies of each data. So in total, you have Azure is helping you keep, I wouldn't say it's helping you keep, Azure is actually replicating 6 copies of the data, but then 3 on each region. So you have, let's say, if you're looking at, let's say, different states in Nigeria, as let's say Nigeria as a country, and then you have 2 regions in Nigeria, like the East or like the West, right? So what Azure does is it keeps 3 copies in the East and then 3 copies in the West. So that is what the redundant storage is all about. Now, you also have what we call the RAGRS. Now, what that talks about is just like talking about where you have a read access to your secondary region. So the same name applies like your redundant storage, but this time around for RAGRS, you're saying read only access redundant storage. So in this case, Azure is providing you with the ability to be able to read your data stored in the secondary region. So remember I talked about geo, meaning two regions involved, right? So two regions involved, meaning you could have, let's say, two countries. They could be in two countries or let me say two different states involved in a country, right? So the idea is to be able to provide 3 copies in the primary region and then 3 copies in the secondary region. In this case, you have like some form of high availability of the data. Now, some people want to go the extra mile and be able to access the copies stored in the secondary region, right? Now, with the RAGRS, which is the read-only access redundant storage, Azure provides you the ability to be able to read from your secondary storage. So let's say there's a form of backup or something going on, or your primary site fails, the secondary site comes in and acts as a form of backup for you, where it just replicates that data to the second primary region, and then pending whatever issues is being resolved in the primary region, your secondary region goes live back. All right, so like you could see, these are various account types, like I said earlier, the general purpose V1, general purpose V2, the blob storage, which has a particular feature for supporting just the premium tier. And then you have the file storage, just like we talked about the file service, you have the file storage that basically supports premium, and then the LRS and ZRS, replication options within limited regions. All right, I will proceed now on this slide. The next thing we want to look at is a few description talking about what the LRS, the GRS, and RAGRS all about. So like I told you earlier, the LRS stores 3 replicas in one region. The interesting part is that for ZRS, which is the zonal redundant storage, you have 3 replicas in 3 different zones in one region. So just like how I spoke about data centers in a particular region, you have what we call zones. Now, the zone feature is not available in every region. There are specific regions where this particular zone is available, right? So once for the zonal redundant storage, you have a scenario where you have 3 replicas in 3 zones in one region, right? Now, for the GRS, which is the geo-redundant storage, like I said, you have something called the 6 replicas in 2 different regions, and you have that 3 in each region, right? Also, you have that for the RAGRS, you have 6 replicas as well. This time around, you have a recovery point objective delay to secondary can be queried. That means you can actually query what you have in your secondary region. All right, I'll be moving ahead to just give you some basic concepts. So you can see this talks about the LRS and ZRS being single regions, and GRS and RAGRS talking about multiple regions. All right, so we also have what we call the GZRS, which is another form of replication. It talks about the geozonal redundant storage. This has 6 replicas in 3+1 zones and 2 regions involved, right? You have 6 replicas, 2+1 zones, right? Or 3+1 zones in 2 regions. Then you have what is called the RAGZRS, which is the read-only access. zonal redundant storage. And this gives you access, read access to your secondary region. All right, we'll be continuing to talk about what I call accessing the storage. And in this particular section, I'm going to try to show you a live demonstration on what this is all about. Now, you must have been hearing various concepts about how do you access your storage accounts, right? I'm going to show you a sample of what the storage account is like and how you can provide access to that storage account using either your container, your table, your queue service, or your file service. Right. So this is what the portal looks like. Right. I have just logged into the portal.azure.com, and I'm going to be going over to my storage account. You can either click on the storage account here. Maybe I should make this bigger. Yeah, so I can provide more visibility to everyone. So you can either click on the storage account here, or you come here and search for storage account. Anyone works fine, right? Once you do that, you go over to the storage account. And from what you can see here, you can see I have actually deployed a couple of storage accounts here. Now, I was basically trying to explain to you how you access your storage account. Let's say you have like a file on your storage account and you want someone else to be able to access that file. How do you go about it? What do you do? In this storage account which I have deployed or created some storage accounts which are different. You can see the kinds here are different. I have some which are the storage v2 and some which are the storage. Now, I'll be making use of this storage account to explain something in particular. Now, if you look at this, you could see that this displays what this storage account is all about. And if you remember earlier, we talked about various services. Now, those services we talked about, such as the container, the file share, the queues, and the tables, are what you have here. Right? So you can see them here. This is the container, the file share, the queues, and the tables. Now, let's take, for instance, you have, you go into the container. What are you expected to see? Or what do you see when you get into a container? So this is a sample of what you see when you get into a container. In here, I have been able to create 2 containers that I want to make use of in this storage account. You can as well create more than 1 container. But for this instance, if you would like to create an extra container, all you just need to do is to click on this plus icon, and then you can give it a name and then give the access level which you wish that container should have. All right. Now, I want to show you how it's possible to be able to access files stored within your storage account and your container from outside of Azure. So how do you access those files? So I'm going into my container now, and you can see here that I have created some files. Now, there is a beautiful thing about Azure in the sense that for every file which you have, there is a link created by default for those files, right? So let's take, for instance, I have a file here called hello.sh. And in that file, I could tell you that that file has a public accessible link, right? And all you need to do to access that file link is just click on the file, and then you'll see the URL of the link here. Right. Now, this URL doesn't mean someone can have access to this URL and then be able to access the content of this file. No, it doesn't work that way. Azure provides a secure level for you before anyone can be able to access your files. Now, you may be wondering, oh, am I really joking about this? Let's take, for instance, let's actually see if we will be able to access this file with just actually copying the link. So I'm copying the link, which is a public link, by the way. What I mean by a public link is that if you take a look at this link here, just a moment, I'm going to display the link here. You would see that it has an HTTPS link, and you see it tells you the name of the storage account, right? And the name of the container and the name of the file itself. Now you may be wondering, can we actually access this file from over the internet? I'm going to show you, and let's see if that will be possible. Now you can see I'm actually deploying this. I'm actually putting it on the pane, and you can see it's giving me some form of error. You might be wondering, what is this error like? Why are we having this error, right? You can see this error is basically just telling you that, well, this seems to be something like an XML file, which it doesn't know about, right? And then it tells you resource not found. And then the next message you see is the specified resource does not exist. Gives you a request ID and a timestamp. But me and you actually know that this resource does exist. And you're wondering, okay, so if the resource does exist and there is a link that can be used to access this resource, why am I not accessing it? Well, Azure provides a secure level or a kind of security that you can enable so that someone from outside of your network or someone from outside your connectivity range can be able to access those files. Right. Now, for me to do that, all I need to do is to create some form of key that I would use as a security to ensure that only who has access to that key can be able to have access to the file. So for me to do that, I'm just going to deploy a key right now. You can see here, this is what we call the shared access signature. And in that key, I can say something like, oh, well, I want you to generate some form of SaaS key for me. And I can specify the time range I want this key to be available. You can see on this particular time range, we have the date and we have the time. And you can see that this key, once I generate this key, is going to expire today, but the time difference is what actually counts. I can decide to extend the date I want the key to be accessible for, right? And the timing as well. All of that just depends on what I want to be able to achieve. And also, one of the beautiful things about Azure is that you can actually declare what IP address you want to be able to have access to this link. Say, for instance, you give this link to someone else, and the person thinks that, let's say, because he has access to that link, he can actually access it from anywhere. No, you can actually block how that person can have access. You can determine that by stating the allowed IP that should be able to have access to this link. Now, so I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to generate the SaaS link, and you can see that it has generated some kind of link for me for my private container. You can see this, right? Now, this link here is generating for just the file, the blob SaaS URL, right? That's what it does. Now, for me to be able to generate for all services, right, there is something I can do to be able to generate for all services, right? Now, for me to generate for all services within my storage account, right, I'm just only going to come here and then come to this shared access key, right, and then enable the features I want to have access to. So for instance, let's say I just don't want to have access to any kind of service. I want to have access to just my file service. So I can pick and say, okay, I want to be able to have access to blob, file, queue, stable storage. And then I can say, okay, allowed resource types could be, you could say service, right? You could pick containers as well. And then you can pick the permissions that should have access to those files, right? What kind of permissions do you want to give that person? So with setting all of this and your time frame, and let's say you want to determine the IP address, I can now generate some strings, which are called the SaaS tokens, right? Now, with this, one of the interesting thing about this is that Well, you can see this is being exposed now, but I can actually always reset it. So let's take, for instance, you have this string, right? I can do something like this, right? I could actually copy this SAS token. Now, because I want to have access to my file from over the internet, all I need as an authentication is this SAS token. And then I come in here and I do something like this, add it at the path of this file, right? And all I need to do is go in here, right? And then I paste this over the internet. Now, you could see it's actually giving me some form of error. That would be because of how I have initiated it. So let's see. One moment. Let me generate this. So I go to my container again. Go to my private container. Yes. Go to this. Good. Right. All I need to do is copy this link like I did initially. I have here, just like I did earlier, and then paste my SAS key. Let's see. Here is my SAS key. Let's see what happens. Everything should be on a single line, by the way. Okay. Yeah. Good. Just ensuring I have everything on a single line. Good. Good. All right. So with this, all I need to do is copy this link and come here, and let's see if we have access to that file. Okay, it still gives us some form of error. Let's see, I may have some kind of block that may be actually obstructing this. But the idea, what I want to be able to do is this. For this particular file, I can do something like this that generates that link for me. You can see something like this here. And let's see, let's try this one. If it gives me the file in question. Good. So this is what I did here. I came into the file itself. This is the file I have. I clicked in here, and then I moved into this section that says generate the SAS, right? Once I click on the generate the SAS key, it generates the token for me, like a form of URL, and then I can copy this link, and then I'm able to have access to the content of the file. Now, if you take a look at this file within the storage account itself to confirm if that is actually what you're seeing, you could, let's say, let me show you what it's like. Let me see if I can show you. Okay, good. View and edit. So view and edit shows me the content of the file itself within the storage account, right? Now you can see that it has deployed, right? It has shown me the content of the file within the storage account, which confirms what we are able to see here. So with this, you can see that, oh, you can actually create some form of security and give a kind of key that is generated as a form of SAS token to someone to be able to access your files within the storage account. Now, I understand there is a question for me. Sir David, I don't know if you can, or Sir Imo, can you actually pick up the question for me? Okay, so I can see here someone is asking me a question and is saying, is the replication default? Is the replication a default, or is it a choice to the customer? Okay, so by nature of the way it's configured, when you want to, or when you are creating your storage account, you need to pick an option, a replication option. What do I mean? So let's come here. Let's see this. You're creating a new storage account. One of the things you're being asked is that you're asked to provide what replication option would you want, right? You can see here, I pick the name of my subscription. I pick, let's say I have a resource group I'd like to use. Let's say I give it, let's say a region. I can say Azure training. I give it the name as a storage account, right? I pick the region. Now you can see what it talks about here, the performance and the redundancy. Now, this redundancy is the option we've talked about. So you can see it says the various options you have are the locally redundant storage, the geo-redundant storage, the zone redundant storage, and the geo-zone redundant storage. So whichever option you decide to choose is dependent on you. It's what you want to be able to achieve. But then you have the options to pick any of this storage. But then if you're looking at cost and some other things, well, you might want to consider the locally redundant storage, which is actually the cheapest. But then as you go on, you keep increasing the cost attached to each of the replications. All right, so I'm going to be proceeding on our slide to continue on what we've been talking about. So you could see here that with each of these services, such as the container service, the table service, you can actually provide some form of security that allows access to each of these services. All right. I'll be proceeding on the slide to talk about how you can secure your storage account. One of the beautiful things that Azure always ensures is that you are able to secure your storage account. You might be wondering, why do I need to secure my storage account when Azure has already secured it for me, right? So this is another level of providing security for you. You want to be able to ensure that your storage account, like let's say you have a certain virtual network in your resource group and you would like for only a certain virtual network or only a certain IP address to have access to that storage account. All you need to do is you can select this option. And if you want to see what this option is like in the real storage account, you find it here. You find it here. I'm bringing up the Azure portal. Good. So let's go back to one of the storage accounts which were previously created. Now you could see this option called the networking. This is the option that provides you with securing your storage accounts, right? So once I pick this option, you see that it brings to me various other options. And now it then tells me, okay, you want to make use of some kind of selected network. Do you have an existing network or do you want to create a new virtual network? Or do you by any chance want to restrict the kind of IPs that can have access to this storage account? So if by any chance you want to restrict the IPs, the option you should be looking at is this option, where you can state the IP address. Let's say you want to make use of some random IP address like this. You can actually state this IP address here, and then you can now say, add your client IP address. So you can see, it says, add IP ranges to allow access from internet or your on-premises network. So if it says this option, if I pick it, what it does is that it adds my own IP address. So a lot of times, some people get locked out of their storage account because they go to select this option and then they put an IP address there, which is not necessarily their own IP address. And by the time they do that and they click on this option that says save, they're actually locked out because they didn't add their own IP address. You can see, so one of the very interesting things is that it's able to detect my own IP address. That is the IP address of the system that I'm currently using. And then it gives me the option to add the IP, right? So once I add that IP, once I click on save, only this IP and this IP will be able to access this storage account. All right. So one of the things you can do is that you can actually slot in your questions, you ask your questions, and then I'll try as much as possible to provide answers before the end of this session. All right, so I'm going to be proceeding on this training session while we talk more on Azure storage. All right, good. So you can see here, once you choose the selected network option, you can decide to select what subnet you want to be able to have access to your Azure storage account. I'll be proceeding on the slide to talk about, okay, how do you create a storage account? This is supposed to be like some demonstration, which I had just probably shown you earlier on how you can create your storage account, how you can upload a file, how you can create a subnet service endpoint, and then how you can test the storage endpoint. Well, for now, what we can do is I can actually just show you how to upload a file to your storage account. Just a quick one. Now, look at this storage account which I have initially created. I can decide to upload, let's say, a file here to this storage account, right? All I need to do is to go into this container and click on the upload button. Once I do that, it gives me an option where I can pick, right, any file within my local system, right? So you can see it actually pops up your option for your local system, your files within your local system, and then you can pick as much as you want to. Now you can see there is an advanced option here that talks about, maybe do you want to upload your .vhd file, or do you want to use what is the default block size to use when uploading? Now you can set all of this for your advanced options, right? And you can also decide to choose an existing scope, or maybe, you can decide to choose an existing scope which you may have already created initially. Well, and once you're done, the next thing to do is to click on this upload option, and then your file is already automatically uploaded to your Azure storage account. All right, so let's proceed with the slide. I know we might not be able to finish all, but I mean, we'll be able to go to some extent. Blob storage. Now, the beautiful thing about the blob storage is that what it does is it basically helps you store various kind of objects. Now, you can see here that one peculiar feature about the blob storage is that you could actually have your container that can take in stuff like pictures, your movies, right? Depending on what image or what particular file you want to upload. All right. You also have your blob container, just like the one we showed earlier, that talks about, when you want to create a new container, you can decide, to give it a name and what permission you want to give on that container level. And then you can click on OK, and then you're able to create a new container within your storage. All right. The next thing you can do in Azure is, yes, one of the things you can do in Azure is create some kind of access tier. So you might be wondering, access tier.
What very much for the wonderful section so far. There's a question for you. There's a question for you by Olatunji Olaoni. He said when locked out at the moment, you put a wrong IP address. How do you go about getting back your storage? That's a question from Olatunji.
Well,
did you get that?
Well, yeah. I get that. That is quite an interesting one, because it might be a tough one actually when you're locked out. But one of the options you could try is you could raise a ticket, and you could raise a ticket to Microsoft Azure using the support options, and the product team can actually look into that for you and see if there is an option to enable it for you. But it's a really, really very difficult one. That is why it's an option you need to explore very carefully. Because once you're locked out, even you yourself would not be able to have access. The only person that will be able to have access is the person you have given access to. It could be an IP address or a VNet. So for you to make use of that option, you really, really need to be careful. Right. So in this case, I would say your best option here is to ensure that you probably kind of raise a ticket to Azure, and they could look into how they could help you. Once they've confirmed your identity, they can see how if they can help you unblock access to that storage account. All right. Are there any other questions anymore?
No, for now.
All right. Anyway, I'll be actually rounding up the session soon anyway, but I would just like to explain these three concepts to us before I round up the session, because I can see our time is far spent. Now, for this particular option, this is a very, very interesting option because it has a lot to determine on how much you're going to be spending, right? Now, the hot tier is a very peculiar situation. So let's say now you're storing some kind of data on your Azure storage, and you know that you're going to be regularly making use of this storage or this particular file which you're storing. One of the options you can make use of is the hot tier. The hot tier is a place where you frequently access objects in that storage account. So then you can categorize that object as saying, oh, I want this to be under the hot tier. Now, the hot tier is actually, I think that's the most expensive one, because I wouldn't say most expensive, but compared to the other two, it is more expensive. Now you have the cool tier. The cool tier is, let's say you have some kind of data where you see that you don't necessarily need to frequently access. Let's say between 1 to 30 days, you can keep that data without actually accessing that data, right? You can decide to store it in the cold tier. The wonderful thing about the cold tier is that it gives you some, according to the cost, right? You get some reduced costing when making use of the cold tier, because one, you are not frequently accessing this data. Now, the very, very, very interesting option provided to us by Azure is the archive tier. This archive tier is wonderful because, I mean, you've heard of the cold storage room before. This archive tier can be seen as that very, very cold storage room. You just put in your data there for 3 months, and okay, you're not having access to that data for even more than 3 months, right? You can actually keep it there in the archive tier, and then the rate at which you be charged will actually be minimal. You understand? The rate at which you be charged will be minimal, and then it provides some form of long duration backup for you. So these are options you want to consider when categorizing how you would like to have access to each of these file options. Now, at this point, I know that our training is coming to an end because the time is exhausted, and I would like to actually open it up for questions based on what we've talked about now and questions you may have had in the past. Please feel free to ask me questions so that I can provide some answers based on what I have talked about so far. Yeah? Any question you would like to ask is heavily welcome, because I mean, we have people in the house here who can provide you answers to, as much as you can. Yeah, so do we have any questions?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Promise Wachuku, for your wonderful section.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate, and it's really, really wrap up for section today. And we have questions quickly from Latunji Ulaoni. The question is, for backing up large volume of data, how is that done?
Okay, so one of the very interesting options that Azure provides to us when it comes to backing up large data is that You can decide to make use of options such as the key vault, right? Now, it depends on how your infrastructure is configured. You can decide to say, okay, I want to create a key vault that can serve as a form of backup, right? That can serve as a form of backup. Note, the key vault is a kind of backup option, right? It also makes use of the storage facility in the back end infrastructure. But this is different from the storage account, how we are making use of the storage account. So your backing up options are different from this storage account. So for the storage account, you get to store your files, your queues, your tables, your data, and all of that. When it comes to backup option, Azure has wonderful service like the Azure Key Vault, where you can configure how you would like to back up your data and how you would like to, transport, or let's say how you would like to ensure that those data are kept in Azure for you. There is also one very option which people use to get into Azure large copies of data. One of that option is called the import export tool. That is, let's say for instance, you have maybe on-prem, you have something like a 64 terabyte kind of storage on-prem, and you want to be able to transport that data to Azure. One of the things you can do is that you can store up this 64 terabytes in your form of hard disk on-prem. You go into Azure, create some form of importing service. It's called the import export tool in Azure. You just go in there, fill in your profile, fill in some options and all of that. Now, once you do that filling in, you can then take that disk to a designated address that will be provided to you. That particular engineer will pick up that hard disk you provided and then transport it to Azure, upload your files to Azure, and then send you back your disk. That way, you'll be able to have access to those data within Azure. I hope I was able to provide some kind of a better explanation regarding that question, though. I hope that was who Tunji. I hope that was explanatory enough. But anyway, one of the beautiful things about this is that you can always engage us. Here's my LinkedIn profile. Anyway, you can always engage us, and we can also always provide materials to you that gives you a better, clear definition on how you can carry out some of these objectives.
Okay, thank you very much, Wachuku Promise, for your wonderful section, and also thank you to all the participants that have been joining us so far. Today marks the end of the section on our Azure Studies live series. So you can see from the chat section that there's a LinkedIn profile to Promise Wachuku. So feel free to connect with him. And also, as you are watching us today, this is our community website, community YouTube channel. We have a website also at azurenigeria.community. You can always visit this website to get updates on our events. And also, don't forget to like our video, our YouTube channel, subscribe to our channel to stay up to date. There's another event that will be coming up, another section coming up live by 6 to 7 p.m. Nigerian time. And it's going to be a wonderful section. That section will be on DevOps Study Series, and that will be anchored by Chamaka Ilbitu, and the topic will be configuration as a code. This section is promising to be the kind of fantastic section because it's going to mark the end of our DevOps Study Series, just as we have ended the live study series on Azure Administrator series. So we are going to also have a section coming up tomorrow on Azure AI Live Study Series, and it's going to be focusing on automated machine learning workload on Azure tomorrow, 20th June at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Nigerian time by Aliu Umeteru. So we encourage you to be part of this section because It's going to be a very good knowledge sharing section whereby you stand the chance of gaining a lot to your knowledge faculty. Thank you very much once again for being part of this training since we started, and we thank you for all the community members for keeping to being on the toast to making this event a successful one so far. Special thanks to our host, Mr. David, for being consistent so far, and also to the wonderful people of the community, even to the wonderful speaker of today. He has been one of the person that have been broadcasting this training since we started in May. Yeah, him and alongside with Raphael and Jafflet and Miss Paul and Oluwaseyi, they have been wonderful people. And I myself, Imo Etuk, we are together in the community. So you feel free to subscribe to our channel, visit our social media and the network to connect with us to stay up to date. Thank you once again for being part of today's section. Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Bye-bye. It was nice speaking to everyone here. Bye-bye.
Bye.